Bob, you're taking an approach where it's not coming from you and saying this is, I think my objection to Ordinance 575 when it was considered is that we did not have a full process to allow it to go through and get all the input. It was really driven by the desire to shut down the dispensaries, which at that time were functioning within the county, not in just one location, but several locations, and the problems. And I think when it came to the land use side of how you operate, the people at that time that were had their Prop 215 cards and so forth, and we kind of worked our way through that as a board. They were operating kind of like under the radar. It was like a small thing. In other words, instead of having a collective or even a co-op, but more so these dispensaries where everybody would just go and get their stuff and be done with it, is that each individual would basically operate on a small scale for themselves, because it's supposed to be about for themselves. Now, some people obviously maybe can't take care of themselves, and so they depend on others, and that's where having the caregivers and maybe having a collective of a small group of people that can be clearly defined that would be able to provide for those who can't provide for themselves. The amount of plants that was used at that point in time, and I think it was in most people's minds, and if you look through the document that Darrell Foster submitted to the board for that workshop down at the Vets Hall, he identified what the variety of ordinances all around the state. It was pretty comprehensive, and I was kind of impressed. And following the digital clipping service for the county, what's going on in other counties, and so for several months now, this debate has been raging all over the state in various jurisdictions, and a lot of it as it related to that worksheet that Darrell provided. And so I think we need to kind of glean information out of that. But there was one consistent thing, and that was that on an individual basis, that for a medical marijuana patient for their own personal needs, the standard use was 6 plants. And if you have a collective, you could do, 2 or 3 people, you could have like a dozen or maybe 18 plants, and you could kind of manage that in that kind of a small scale setting. It wasn't until the feds decided to finally react after they had been strongly opposed to the state of California having its own way of doing things. And I don't know where the pressure came from, but eventually the U.S. Attorney General backed off and put out the edict that the federal prosecutors weren't going to mess with anybody unless it was 100 plants or more. And now all of a sudden, just as it was testified even again this morning, now this 99 standard became the basis for grows that would operate legitimately under the medical marijuana thing. Well, that was never envisioned 4 years ago, anything of that magnitude. And see, that was one of the shortcomings of Ordinance 575. And what, if nothing else, we need to address and fix is to create some definition, not have a de facto definition based upon what the Attorney General of the U.S. decided to do and everybody reacting to that, but in terms of doing it as it relates to the individual. I was particularly impressed with Mr. Hines' testimony when he came up in a very animated fashion, and he talked about the most any one person could consume in terms of crop from a crop would be 10 plants. So he used 10 plants, and he smokes a lot of pot, and he smokes it all the time. And I got that, and I was kind of happy for him. And so, so he's obviously got that standard from personal use, and he understands I have it's a world that's totally foreign to me. I have no concept as to what a lot of this even means in terms of how it functions for the individual. So you've got 6 plants was what was originally kind of conceived as being where everybody would be at. Today the Republican Senate Committee is saying a dozen plants, is for one person would be there. That's kind of double the previous standard. It's a little bit more than what Mr. Hines said, so I guess there's a little bit left over for, visitors or something. And then you have the small business people that have moved in to try to, capitalize on the market and coming up with these 99 plant grows. And of course that sets up, if you get a bunch of them in that area, that they have to, the cartels that are being busted out in the forest, they're now finding it's a lot easier just to come in and raid those little small operations like that, and they can get just as much of a harvest as they do if they try to grow it on their own in the public land. So you have those dynamics playing across the board, and that's a law enforcement issue of concern and a public safety issue, I think, is concern. But ultimately what we need to do, though, is, obviously, Prop 215 and SB 420 and the ordinances there are designed to take care of the needs of the individuals who have it, but to do that in balance with everybody else's needs in a free society. And yeah, they have a right, but they don't have a right to trespass or trump other people's rights to live in the environment they have. And so I think when it comes to these outdoor grows, I think the loudest message I got from the testimony is, yeah, it's your right maybe to do that. Maybe you can get away with growing 99 plants, but your right to exercise that, causing me the impact on my rights to live in a secure, peaceful, quiet environment. I've chosen it, and I'm already here. And that's where you have the plants grown above the fence. You have the intensity of the number of plants creating the obnoxious odor. I mean, if somebody moved in next door and opened up I'll use it since we've already had that debate here in the county of pig farm, and all of a sudden there's a big pig operation going, and the odors that will be emitted from that operation is obviously going to be of interest to the adjoining property owners and their value of their property and their right to enjoy their property, which is an equal right to the operator of the pig farm, or you could use any kind of a business type model. The only ordinance that we've passed as a county that protects one business to be able to operate, irrespective of what the impact is upon the adjoining property, is the general farmer in terms of ag lands being cultivated for crops. So if a farmer gets out there and fires up his tractor at 4:30 in the morning, because that's what farmers do, an adjoining residential subdivision can't complain because they've moved in on the farmer's rightful operation. And that's the premises. So we're a right to farm county in that respect. But outside of that, pretty much any sort of use of a property has to be done in conjunction with how it's going to impact the adjoining properties. And that's how we get neighbors to live peacefully amongst themselves. The medical marijuana one, right now I think is defining that. And there are those, and I appreciate the testimony of the really small operators who respect that. And they're the ones that are going to be losing out in the struggle unless we do something right to protect that, because these bigger operations are right now trouncing that, and we need to fix that. And I think that's where all these questions need to be answered from. I could go through it one by one, but I think that's the general gist, Mr. Chairman. That was the concern I had 4 years ago when Ordinance 575 was drafted. It was put into effect for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to deal with the dispensaries, and I don't think we really fully addressed the other ramifications. And hopefully this time we take the process, however long it takes, to do it right, because if we don't get it squared away now dealing with medical marijuana, if indeed we find ourselves dealing with recreational marijuana like several states have just passed last week, California is poised to do that come 2016. If you think you have a problem, now it's going to be tenfold in terms of the magnitude. So I think the regulatory process needs to be squared away as a precursor to that. Otherwise, we've lost the war.
My one comment there, Mr. Supervisor Chapman, is that I'm operating at this time on the premise that in 2016 it's plausible, if not likely, that we'll see that initiative reach the California ballot and probably be approved. I heard about a radio broadcast this morning out of a Nevada radio station. I want to thank you. I don't think it was 870 I was listening to, but they did speak to the proposition, poor word choice, they did speak to the idea that in Nevada they have already collected somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 signatures towards, I think it was your broadcast there, Mr. Wheeler, towards recreational use in Nevada to get it on the ballot in Nevada in 2016, and they only needed 100,000 signatures. So it's coming to California. My point being that I'm operating on the premise that I'm going to be, unless I get some instruction otherwise, although I think it can be done to accommodate both, I'm writing an ordinance or writing a proposed amendment to an ordinance that contemplates our issue now and what I expect our issue will be after 2016, one that has a little bit of a longer range view. I think it can be done to accommodate both, if done right.
It needs to be done to accommodate both. Sure. I think that's the challenge before us.
Yes, sir.
And our existing ordinance did not, it was 4 years ago. It was long before we see what we're seeing today. So I don't think the staff and the board had the crystal ball at that time, but I knew at that time how we dealt with the homegrown 6 plants or less kind of thing. You know, that standard was not codified, and so as a result of that, you know, that was the understanding that was given. But as a result of that, it created a vacuum, which that vacuum was filled by the de facto activity as a result of the U.S. Attorney General's decision, and we missed the vote on that.
What I suggest we do, because we could easily spend like 10 hours on this, so I'd like to take a quick public comment, and I'd like to go most of your questions that you've asked to get a good idea of the board, we could answer in basically one word. I mean, do you think it should be limited number of plants? I mean, I say yes, Aaron may say no, and then we move on. And based on that, you have direction.
Yeah.
I think that's the most meaningful thing we can do. So if that's okay with the board, I'll go to public comment and then we'll come back. Is there anybody that would like to talk on this matter under public comment? Okay. So
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Come on up.
Carol Byers. What if you just outlawed the growth in the county and had 2 dispensaries, one for the East County and one for the West County? And if you decide to go a different route, something that you said triggered a memory that I had regarding the indoor specifications and the electrical specifications. I don't know how many of you remember this. You remember when we had Richens Propane on Main Streets where the AmeriGas eventually? Well, Karen Richens' house in Janesville burned down because she had a sophisticated growing operation in her garage, and the wiring was bad. But on an aside, it was kind of funny because she was head of the anti-drug program at Richmond School. And I thought, what a better cover. And so there needs to be strict guidelines.
Well, my interest in discussing that issue is not necessarily to protect the property of the person that chooses to grow marijuana inside their house. My interest in having that discussion is more along the lines of protecting those who happen to live in the house that might not be of an age to care for themselves. If their parent or guardian chooses to grow in the home they happen to be being raised in. That's my issue, and I think I'm hoping you share that. I'm sure you do.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, Tom Lawson here. At the Veterans Hall, some of us that have been there in the forefront of marijuana for a real long time, we saw there was a disturbance in the force, and usually, in Humboldt County, you always see grower versus grower, and that's what we saw. That's probably what you people didn't see. But what we see and what we hear out here is there was this tension amongst the growers.
Little grower versus big grower.
Right, then a big grower, then you got your Lake Forest grower versus your Janesville grower. Okay, and once again it goes back to or the grower out there. So everybody takes sides, and then all of a sudden one tries to outdo the other one, and it gets nasty, and you never get to see it at this level. There's not much that law enforcement can do about it on the nastiness, and there's not much that the neighbors can do. And that's why there's a reason that I guess that a lot of the complaints that people have to come up, and I've seen this. I go back and forth between here and Wairika area, and they call that the Emerald Triangle. They come up with all kinds of, one grower will grow a male plant to destroy 99 plants. That's what, that's where they're at. They'll get these little hovercrafts, RC, little helicopters.
Drones.
And they'll drop pollen on their enemies.
Chemical warfare.
Yeah, well, I don't know, they're pollinating. But, and they do these things. And that's what we notice. And that's why I hate to bring that up because I'm on, I can convince you guys to do this and I can convince you guys not to do this. And it's like, that's why that third party, and maybe even if this board here directs or makes a committee from the people, and that people come up with an ordinance of some sort or have some kind of play. Therefore, the burden is taken away, or the load, per se, is taken away from you five. And because this is what we see all the time, and it's happening in Oregon, and it's happening here. Our cartels, they used to be pretty good at it, but now they saw this grower versus grower. And they're like, well, we don't know what to do now. You know, the growers are growing more and more. They're putting actual chemicals in it so they can get more. And the end result is that you got the person freebasing chemicals. So you have all these pros and cons, and you know, that unforeseeable things, unless there's somebody, a third neutral party that can come in and you know, like a court. Sometimes a court doesn't know everything, so they get a court-appointed special advocate that is professional about it, and they can render an opinion on what the best way to go about it. Because evidently, for the last couple of years, you guys have been given all this against marijuana stuff, and very little pro about it. And somewhere there has to be a neutral phase. And the end result of medical marijuana is to help the individual, the patient, not for them to get chemical-based
If I
marijuana.
could respond to that point for just a moment, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, all I can say is when I listened down there at the vet's office, I don't think there was a person in the room that was against having marijuana grown for a patient, which I think is totally different from the environment that we as a board sat in 4 years ago. I was really amazed at the people who all came up and says, you know, Prop 215's passed, they got the card, there's a need, and you know, we accept that and we're willing to live with that, but if we're going to do it, it has to be done in a way that doesn't impact all the rest of us. So I think that part of it, at least I think as a community, we've made a huge shift away from maybe the previous biases, you know, whether that's based upon whatever input or whatever's gone on, but I think that is a significantly different. So now it's how do we protect the small individual who's trying to take care of their need and live within the context of that law, and they're being stepped on by all these rival. I didn't know they were into drone wars now and pollinating and doing that stuff, but I mean that's a whole different world that is really jeopardizing the small guy who has fought to get the right that they have to do what they're doing now. And I think that's what we need to kind of focus on. But the community, I think, accepts that. I think that's a major movement that has only just a shift that has only recently happened in the last couple, 2-3 years.
Thanks. We're going to thank you.
Tom, I have one question for you, and that is, some people say 10 plants, some people say 6, some people say 12,
Some people say 99.
some people say 99. What would be your recommendation per person? I mean, what's your thinking?
Well, it depends. What is the yearly amount, and then from that you go forward, because somebody can grow indoors and get in a room like this can come up with about 7 or 8 pounds every 3 months. So they can do that in the wintertime.
Because you know how to do the math. You said 99 plants is 4 packs per hour.
Right, that's based on 1.2 pounds per plant. And that a plant like that is about 1.2, depending on the strain. So if you get a sativa that usually they grow a little bit bigger, and you know you can probably push maybe 3 pounds out of a plant that can reach the ceiling here. So it depends once again on the plant. Your indicas they grow very short and bushy, so you can only get maybe a max close to a pound on that. So I had to come up with a point of reference number, and I said 1.2. Usually that's what you get out of a plant like this. And we like to grow these here because we can walk and do this, as opposed to ladders. So, and with us, it's always safety like that. You know, somebody wanting to grow a 10-foot plant, they just want to poke somebody in the eye, or that's the first time of doing that. So, and I'm coming from a federal point of view, and that's why I said when I first come up here, I said I'm also a resident. At the same time, I'm Native American under 25 CFR, which we have a whole different federal laws behind us too. But I came here as a resident of Lassen County, because that's something that we share in common. I've been approached many times, oh, you can do all this federally and everything, and I get all these opinions. Well, let's do this, let's do that, and it's always profit motivated.
So I have one other question for you. So to get that 6-foot plant, from the time you put the seed in the ground to get it to 6 foot to harvest, what's your time frame on that? 4 months? 5 months?
That height? Well, it depends on elevation here. So which elevation are you talking
Here.
about?
Right here, Lassen County.
Okay, but you have different elevations.
Different elevations? Did you say different elevations?
Yes, there's different
Oh.
elevations.
4,400 square, 4,500 feet.
Well, if you start the plant indoors, you can transplant it outside. And you're talking about a
By the
regular.
time you put the seed in the ground, by the time you get your 6-foot plant harvested, what's your time?
Well, in the last couple of years here, what we've had is a frost come in early. So it limits down to 3 months now.
3 months, good enough, thank you.
So
All right.
that's,
You have to put limitations on it.
Quickly, yeah. All right. Go, Carol, you have something else?
Well, yes, at that meeting, somebody was talking about having a plant that was 20 feet tall. I mean, what if you get a whole bunch that size, then,
Okay, we'll get to that.
Could I add something
Sure.
to this? Iona McCain here. Everett and I were doing a cadastral survey over there in Mendocino Forest in a place called Elk Mountain. And we ran into a grower, and the guy literally had his plants hanging off the tree and the dripper system going across the trees in the forest. We're surrounded by forest. And the problem is that we were employed by the Department of Forestry, and we had to go to their federal agent, and then they told us to get our, out of there. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of serious things that you have to deal with the federal government with growing these things, and what you can and cannot do. It's your life.
like Caligari. I'm more worried about the education that we should be giving our young people on the dangers of marijuana. And when they keep calling medical and all this, it damages the brain. Then they get on that, and then they go to higher drugs, meths or whatever you want to call them. And I think if we're going to legalize all this stuff and allow it to be here, then let's pay some money out to train these young kids to take care of their body and not put stuff in it that is damaging to them. And I'm telling you, marijuana starts them on the other drugs.
Thank you. Anyone else? Now, I have a quick question just before we begin
Yes, sir.
going over your stuff. Carol mentioned, and I think she said the dispensary.
Yes.
Yeah, but
I wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, you said that's illegal.
It is, and let me be specific as to why I believe it to be illegal. Okay, so Prop 215 and Senate Bill 420, as I pointed out in our study session, remember, that doesn't give individuals, as was set out in the Morale decision and another one that predated that, can't recall the name of that, Indian Valley Health Clinic out at Riverside. It doesn't confer on growers or possessors some broad constitutional right. It didn't create a right when none existed before. Well, all it did was provide a kind of limited defense to individuals that are cultivating marijuana and or possessing marijuana against prosecution. Okay? And that needed to be said because there is this thing called the Federal Controlled Substances Act, passed by the United States Congress, which is still the law of the land, which, and it has listed in there. Now, there's going to be a lot of debate about whether it should be listed in there or it should not be listed in there, whether it's outdated and needs to be updated. That's a whole other discussion. My point being that it is still on the list of prohibited substances for purposes of distribution. Okay? Distribution of marijuana under the Federal Controlled Substances Act is a federal crime. Now, whether the U.S. attorneys are enforcing that or not, you're probably going to have a conversation with them about whether the target you want to talk to them about has more than 99 plants or not. So a dispensary, and here's the narrow answer, and I'm sorry I'm taking long, but this is.
I've got another so you guys continue and I'll catch up to you down at some point.
Dispensary, I believe a dispensary contemplates the providing of marijuana by one person to another where there is not a primary caregiver relationship, that would essentially be sales of drugs under the Federal Controlled Substances Act.
Even though they have that card, and even though so all the other counties.
Without see, that's the thing. Without the caregiver designation, it wouldn't be protected even under California law.
Okay, so the other counties are just trying their luck, but basically disregarding those laws.
Yeah, I think that what they've done is they've kind of, well,
Yeah.
I'll let them speak for themselves.
Okay. Yeah.
Caught myself there, didn't I?
Because, I mean, that would certainly allow a county to ban all growth of it and just have like two, by use permit, one or two places where people can go buy the legal substance with a 215 card and they don't have to worry about people growing it.
Yeah, but to the degree that you encourage that and then permit that by use of a conditional use permit and monitor that,
Yeah.
I think in essence what you're doing is you're encouraging violation of federal law.
Yeah.
And that would not be wise, and I would counsel you against that.
Okay. So then I think what we'll do is we'll take up your questions.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm ready to go.
So we'll start with, we'll just go down the line this way. So Tom, the first question.
All these questions, everything that, what I refer to as stacking of licenses is probably where 99% of the problems come from. That's the 99 plant grows. The smaller grows don't seem to incur near the problems. So limiting the plants.
Can we just take up we'll take up
Well,
question
I'm
one.
just answering them all at one time.
Well,
Because
let's just go down. Let me.
I think that's important because I think I'm hearing Supervisor Hammond loud and clear. I think that was the kind of the evil that was really evil, poor word choice. That was the issue that really was almost unanimously complained about at the study session was the large grows of 99 plants with the stacking of the recommendations. My questions more relate to, okay, so let's say that's out of the picture. Are we going to let it happen outdoors?
So you addressed that in here.
Yes.
You addressed that. I think that's what my point is. I think you addressed all that. So, okay. To the degree that cultivation is permitted, where should it be permitted? Inside, outside, or both?
both.
What setback requirements might be imposed? And I mean, if you don't know, yeah, you say, I don't know. Okay, exactly. I don't know either. Some setback. Okay, well, that's Tom's answer. Very good. So, Bob, any question to you?
I would say both, for one person to use the medical marijuana card only. What is it?
Okay, very
As far
good.
as setback goes, I don't care.
Yeah, I'd say my answer is both, and with some sort of setback.
It's important that we talk about what Mr. Pyle just said, and that is that, and this was also addressed in the letter that Mr. Hodge sent. It was a provocative statement. The prohibition of the cultivation of medical marijuana in all zones of Lassen County except for the personal medicinal purposes of qualified card holders. What that would mean in essence is that no one in Lassen County could grow for anyone other than themselves. That, I think, would fly in the face of, and essentially what that would mean is, yes, a person, if they were too ill to grow, and even if they just wanted, 4 plants or 5 plants or something, to take care of their needs for whatever period of time, they could not designate someone to do the growing for them, and so that would preclude that. And in essence, what would occur is people, and the argument will be made, that are too ill to grow for themselves are being treated differently than those that are healthy enough to grow for themselves. It's just talking out loud here.
Okay, well, let's get through these and then we'll get to the add-ons.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay. So I would say both, and I would say some setbacks are needed. Aaron?
I would say inside only and 30-foot setback.
Okay, then you ask, shall there be, assuming outside cultivation is permitted, a fencing requirement?
Yes.
I'd say yes.
Yes.
Shall there be a plant count limitation?
Yes.
Yes.
Probably.
Probably,
So, yes.
fine.
Yeah.
I would say yes, 2 plants per person with a 2-person max per household.
And so, for those supervisors that indicated that there should be a plant count limitation but didn't say a number, is it possible to get a number certain?